a little draft day reality. Who's going where? Beginning to clear up. Our first trade has been made. Rumors of where free agents are heading. Two hot names in the NBA. A scary scenario. And more details. It's all coming up. 2 days till draft day on Tip-Off. Bum, 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 bum. Go away from the draft for a second. Bum, 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 bum. Giants behind Barry Zito. Crush the Dodgers. Bum, 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 bum. 2 games out of first place. Bum, 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 bum. I know nobody cares about baseball, but I had to throw it out there. All my Giants beating the Dodgers. Nothing better. Let's talk. The first trade has come down. Houston has traded Chase Buttinger, who they drafted with the 44th pick of the draft 3 years ago in a trade for a future second-round pick, to Minnesota today for the pick that was the Jazz, the 18th. So Chase Buttinger to Minnesota. Houston now owns 14, 16, and 18 in this draft. So that is, Houston has suddenly become a huge player in how this draft plays out. That's improving an asset pretty fabulously with the way in which they just took 44 to 18. Obviously, all the talk is Dwight Howard, but we'll see what happens. Houston has been picking up and been an above-average team for a long time by picking up, Chase Buttinger, overachieving Kyle Lowry type players, and they finally want stars. And they're right. That's the way it goes. The draft is becoming more clear. I'll publish something later today on this. But what's becoming clear is the tiers. Now, where guys are going, and I'll share some of the rumors with you, is changing up a good deal. But the tiers are clear. The first 6 are really pretty clear who they are. It's Barnes and Gilchrist, Kidd, and Beal, and Robinson and Davis. That 6 seemingly is clear, though there's going to be a rumor I'll tell you here where Barnes suddenly ends up someplace else. Then that next tier is seemingly pretty evident, though there's a little change as who goes between Leonard, Henson, and Zeller is being talked, is a little bit of a mix match right now on who believes who's going there. And then finally, it breaks again at 20, and then 20, and then 20 through 30 is there. But what's important about this is if you're trying to make a deal in this draft, and probably why the Houston deal went down, everyone now can get pretty close to 2 or 3 names of who they might want and where they're going to be. If you're the Jazz and you have a player you specifically want, barring some real surprise and some things changing, I think you can zero in on where to go get that guy if you're trying to get into the draft right now. I'll write this up and have it up at Locked On Jazz later today, so check that out. The other thing I worked on till probably 1:32 last night was this really what's fair to expect out of the draft. And here's the reality on what there is to expect out of the draft. On an average draft, you will get 1 all-pro player. And I think that's clear in this draft. That's Anthony Davis. You will get 2 more all-stars. To me, that's really unclear who that is in this draft. You will then get 7 additional starters and 11 other rotation players. So you'll get about 21 impact players from a draft. Imagine how much fun it would be if you suddenly limited all of us who do analysis of this draft and suddenly made it so that when we talked about it, we could only mention 3 players as future all-stars, because that's all you'll get. And only another 7 players as starters. And then let me take it another step, if I may. The chances are that all-pro is going to come 1 through 5. There has not really been an all-pro player since 1997 drafted outside of the top 10, in my estimation. I mean, just how I broke it down. There's been 14 of them, 9 of them taken 1 through 5, and 5 of them taken 6 through 10. And so that's okay. So there one, and that's Anthony Davis. I mean, I think at every indication he's a game changer. Now, if you're going to get if there's going to be there's 2 other All-Stars, and the chances are one of those players is also 1 through 5, and the other chance of that player is he is actually equally that he comes out of the second round as he comes out of 6 through 10. I mean, like, who that third All-Star is in this draft, there have been 5 of them since 97, 6 through 10. There have been 2 of them 16 through 20, 2 of them 21 through 30, and 5 of them in the second round. That's a lot. Now, make sure you understand that there's a 1% chance that's a second round pick and an 8% chance that's 6 through 10. So I think it all. I think that's a possibility. Sorry, things are breaking actually as I'm recording this. The Warriors' number 7 is evidently in play with Houston in Houston's 14, 16, and 18th picks of the draft. It's going to be very interesting to see how this all plays. Okay, so if you're looking at this draft, Anthony Davis is your All-Pro. Then go find 2 guys that are going to be taken in the top 10 and choose them to be your All-Star. That's really if you're going to look at it. And don't go any further. Don't go give me Anthony Davis or somebody like that. You really those are the 2 guys. Now, if I was going to guess, I don't know. I do think Harrison Barnes is going to be fabulous. So I would probably make a guess on Harrison Barnes, and then I don't know who that other player is. I don't think Lillard's an All-Star. I talked to somebody yesterday who thought Dion Waiters was going to be very good. Thought he had a fabulous upside. Austin Rivers probably has that capability with his background, and his game is really solid. Thomas Robinson, who's the number 2 pick, seems to be more of a kind of a solid player. And I get a little nervous about the 21-year-old Robinson and the 21 Lillard, as I've talked about. Okay, so now you're looking at then the next part of this is that there's 7 players that are going to be starters in this draft. And the chances are, when you look at those, that 2 of them are coming 1 through 5 again. So really, in 1 through 5, you're going to get 2 starters. Probably Thomas Robinson is a starter, and then either Kid Gilchrist or Beal is another starter. And then one of those just slips down. One of those just never becomes as good as you think. It's hard to envision that right now, but one of those probably won't become a starter. Then you have 2 more starters, 6 through 10. So Lillard's probably a starter in the NBA, and Austin Rivers is probably a starter, but whether it's Jeremy Lamb, depending where he goes, or Andre Drummond, there's of 33% of the picks, 1 or 2 of the guys, 6 through 10, will end up not being a rotation player. So when you suddenly start talking about an 18-year-old like 7-foot Andre Drummond, that would make me awfully nervous. So there's 4 starters. Now you've got to find, 3 more in this draft that are going to be starters, and the likelihood is that one of those comes from 16 through 20. One of those comes 21 through 30, and one of those comes from the second round. Is really the likelihood of how that plans out. And so when we're analyzing this draft, that's how you really have to look at it. 11 through 15 is kind of the dead zone. But who is it? A lot of people I talked to somebody who really believes in Mo Harkless, the St. John's power forward who's 6'9", as a real possibility of becoming a big-time player yesterday. Then you get 16 through 20. Who's the player in 16 through 20 that's going to become a starter? Is the 23-year-old Jeff Taylor out of Vanderbilt. Once we get that late in the draft, I suddenly like age. I like the players who now have a little bit of experience and are able to jump into it. And then obviously, who's your starter in the second round? That's very hard to be able to figure out. So that's the way you have to realistically look at this draft as everybody starts to discuss it and figure out what's going on with it, is that the truth of the matter is there's one All-Pro. My guess, having not watched as much film as I usually do, Anthony Davis. Two All-Stars. I would probably take Harrison Barnes, and I really have watched Dion Waiters very little. People really like him. Might be Austin Rivers. I think he's got a little chutzpah to him that might be able to allow him to come through on that. And they're coming from that part of the draft. Don't kid yourself into suddenly believing that an all-star is coming from somewhere else. Since 1997, there have only been 9 all-stars in 13 drafts I've analyzed that come after the 10th pick of the draft. It's an unlikely possibility, and many of those are Marc Gasol or Manu Ginobili types who are foreign players that came over from that. And even when you're looking at a starter, making a starter in the NBA draft since 97 to 2009, so 13 drafts. When you start looking at a starter in the NBA, I'm doing this off the top of my head because this was not a number I was planning on pulling up today, but between picks 27 plus 5, 32, there have been between picks 1 through 10, 74 starters in the draft over the last 13 years. And then if you, after that, in the first round, if you move on past that in the first round, there have only been 44 starters, 11 through 30, and if you even include the second round, then you end up with 68 starters. So to say that again, 1 through 10 in those 13 years is that you have 74 starters. And after that point, you have 68 starters that have come into the draft. That's that tells you, don't start falling in love with believing that, oh, this guy at 13 is going to, it just doesn't happen. The guy at 18, just doesn't happen in a lot of ways. And that's where I think the Jazz are in an awfully tough situation right now, because when I've talked to people around the league and trying to figure out what the Jazz can garner, if they were to trade their first-round pick unprotected, talking to 2 or 3 people yesterday, they said to me that they would be around 14. Maybe they could get into the draft somewhere in that realm. If they protected it, it would probably be around 18 to 20. So that's all they could do with next year's pick. The asset of Devin Harris, they think would be very difficult with $8.5 million. There just aren't many teams where Harris gets added that team gets dramatically better. Millsap, this was interesting, depending on who you were talking to, for the money for the position, as they were saying, people didn't think that piece could really get you high up into the draft, that at $8 million or whatever Paul's that's an awful lot. And really for a lot of teams, what position is Paul going to play? He still ends up maybe not being a starter. And so now you're paying, marquee money for your $8 million for 1 year as your third big to give up a top 10 pick. And that seems unlikely for most teams. I mean, the places where the Jazz would probably like to get in, the Raptors at 8, they have Valanciunas and Bargnani. Are they going to want to make that deal for Paul Millsap and give up the 8th pick? I think that's unlikely. Detroit at 9 has Monroe. They're looking for someone to couple with Monroe. They have Jason Maxiell, who's a poor man's Paul Millsap. He's not nearly as good, but not that far. New Orleans has a huge amount of pieces that they need to fill, so maybe at 10 there'd be some sort of possibility there. Portland at 11, Millsap goes and plays with LaMarcus Aldridge, maybe. But again, that's taking a lot of money, and the Jazz would have to take, on the teams that are not over the salary cap, or not under the salary cap. Now, Toronto and New Orleans both are, but the other players that we're talking about, if it's someone like Portland you have to give back at least $3-4 million a contract that they don't want at that point. And the only contract they have they probably really don't want is Jamal Crawford. If Crawford is going to opt in, but all indications are that Crawford's opting out, so it's hard to see how Paul gets you anything there. Milwaukee at 12, if they really think they're going to lose Ilyasova, maybe there's something going on, a possibility there in some ways. But again, the Jazz, because they're at 45 on their cap, so they'd be close to being able to just make that deal. But in all likelihood, the Jazz would probably have to take back some sort of contract or something to get these deals done. It just, talking to people, it seems very uninteresting from a Jazz standpoint on how these things could break. And the general consensus was that Jefferson's deal just way too big for anything to happen with. All right, here's some other notes as this is getting long. It took me a whole day before I got going. Rumors Brandon Roy had plasma treatment on his knee. He will be coming back. Indiana's a possibility. Also, Dallas is a possibility. It's being talked about there with Roy, Minnesota. Chauncey Billups, if he's healthy, is he's seriously considering going to Miami, and that's why Miami is going to be incredibly difficult to unseat as champion. They're just going to keep adding high-level pieces. Steve Nash made it very clear that he wants money, and that is a part of this, and Toronto becomes very high possibility there if money is really an issue. As I mentioned yesterday, talking to someone, Mo Harkless and Dion Waiters both got high regards. Draft day rumor is that Lillard could somehow end up in Sacramento, which seems crazy with Marcus Thornton, Tyreek Evans, and Jimmer Fredette, but that Lillard could end up in Sacramento at 5. Kid Gilchrist slips to 2nd, and then Harrison Barnes ends up 7 for the Warriors. Kind of an interesting scenario there. I'd hate to see Harrison Barnes end up in the Warriors because I think Harrison Barnes can be very good. Myers Leonard is working out in Philly today. That's interesting because the Sixers have that 15th pick, and there's just this whole discussion starting at 9, depending whether Andre Drummond drops there. Drummond is probably the first big to go. Then Henson, Zeller, and Leonard are all kind of debated amongst themselves, and we'll see who goes where, and Leonard is in Philly today. All right, that's the latest of what's going on. As I said yesterday, if it becomes important, I will try to get my Lillard video done yet. It's just a lot of stuff happening, and I actually have some real life things I have to deal with today. So we'll see if that gets done. See you guys.